I'm here with Travis Hume, who is the creator of the Applying Stoicism project, something I think is particularly interesting for modern Stoic applications, for what's going on in the whole modern Stoic movement. I'll let Travis tell you about it in just a minute, but first I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got to know him and about what I understand his project to be and why I think it's particularly cool. So I'll start with that. The Applying Stoicism is unlike some other projects that you can see out there where people are talking about Stoicism, in that Travis only writes about things where he's actually given it a shot. Doesn't mean that he necessarily succeeded in it, but a lot of the time he does. But things that he has actually applied in his real life, career, relationships, and then reflected about. So I think that's a really great project. You can find him. We'll talk about this at the end as well. But you can find him not only on the main web page, but also there's a Facebook group. There's a Google Plus. He's on Patreon if you'd like to support his activity, which I strongly suggest you doing because it's a great project. So how did you actually decide to do this in the first place?
It was an extension of me trying to help other people in where I was at. So in my second year of college, I discovered Stoicism. To give you a shorthand version of it, I was extremely emotional. I was constantly worried about what other people were thinking about me or what people were saying about me. I was in a state where I felt as though if I wasn't in a relationship, that it somehow impacted my value as a person. And during an intro to philosophy course that I was forced to take by my chosen major, psychology major, I overheard some things from somebody called Epictetus that really clicked with me. And from that point on, I thought to myself, is there a different approach to life? Is it possible that what Epictetus said, which was it's enough to be a good person, to be happy, could that really be true? And I took a shot in the dark and I started trying to really put into practice what he said.
So for you, it was an experimental introduction, you could say.
Oh yeah, it was highly experimental. I had no idea what I was doing. to be perfectly honest, I had no idea if it was going to have any kind of really lasting psychological effects. I knew that other people were going to see my change of behavior and start to question it, possibly stop being friends with me. I really had no idea what kind of impact it was going to have on me in general. As I started practicing it, I started to see that there was a real behavioral difference. Things started to get to me less, I started to be impacted less, and as a result of the different incentives, the different suggestions that the Stoics suggest in order to try to help those around us in our greater or immediate community, I tried to latch onto that and start acting upon that. So I joined student government, I became a resident assistant at my university, and I started a Facebook group, which is now forms the core of most of my writing, aside from putting the rest of it onto my main website. It started as just something that was for my friends and family, saying to them that they understood that I was something called a Stoic and that it affected my behavior somehow, but it was a way for other people to, for one, to get a better understanding of why I went about things the way that I did, and at the same time, potentially trying to help them see how I apply Stoicism and to try to factor it into their own lives. I didn't do any kind of marketing. I didn't try to put out there that this website existed, because I really tightly controlled my expectations of what it was or what it could be. So most of the vast majority of the growth that it's experienced has been from word of mouth, and I'm very happy with that.
Yeah, that's actually one of the things. I mean, this is a bigger topic for like the whole modern Stoic community. I think there's some sort of using the Stoic name or the Stoic idea to sell something, and there's more of an emphasis on like, let's do the market research beforehand, and does the dichotomy of control sell well? Let's talk about that. With you, it's the exact opposite, where you're doing it first, and then if people come to it, that's great. The Facebook group, interestingly, I should point out, has sort of taken on a life of its own, where a lot of people are posting their own applied Stoicism stuff. I post there as well when I do a video that might be relevant, or a blog post. And so I think actually on Facebook, in the modern Stoic movement, it's probably the second largest of the Facebook groups, behind the main one that Donald Robertson runs, which nothing can really compare with that. That's got 35,000 members or something.
35.
But I think you have 3,000 or 4,000 members at this time, so that's pretty amazing. I know you have more members on your Facebook group than I have on my author page that I've had out for about 6 years. So I think you've been building a community.
Yes. So originally, it's the way that I approached it is the same that I've been approaching it to now, which is if I experience an event, or I'm going to go into some kind of event, or I'm anticipating it, how do I take what I'm experiencing and applying Stoicism to it, and to try to convert it into something that other people can read and ultimately use. And I haven't ever deviated from that. I'm never going to deviate from that. But in the time that it's been growing, I've noticed that other people are starting to contribute kind of in the same way. And then ultimately, now they are contributing in that same way, where they're posting their essays, their personal projects, and I'm very appreciative of that. For me personally, what matters to me the most is that people are ultimately benefited by this, that they're able to take what they see on there and are able to apply it to their own lives and be benefited from it. Because the more that it circulates, the more that it could potentially benefit other people. And that's ultimately what my goal is as long as what's on there is constructive and assists people in their personal practice, that's the aim. So I'm very happy with it.
So that brings up a good question, I think, for some of the viewers who might not be as familiar with Stoic philosophy. I think a lot of people view it as, in terms of self-help, as kind of a withdrawal from things that we find irritating or anxiety-provoking, so that we insulate ourselves effectively from the world and from other people. But the way that you're talking about it, I mean, you mentioned once you started doing this, you got into student government, which I think a lot of people, but why would you possibly do that, right? Or this notion of creating a website, which is a big hassle, quite frankly, and monitoring what people get in, the conversations they get into, to help other people. So why is that particularly Stoic?
So for most people, in my very personal opinion, they're going to be going into it kind of the way that you just described, which they're looking for some kind of greater internal freedom against all the kinds of things that life throws at us, seemingly on a moment-to-moment basis sometimes. And it was the same for me. I approached Stoicism, like I said, because I wanted to have that sort of control, that sort of insulation, some kind of greater range of agency or action, or at least a feeling representative of it. That's how I see a lot of people approach it, and in the beginning, that's, in my opinion, okay. It's okay to feel that way, because there has to be a starting point somewhere, and you have to be able to focus most of your effort into one thing at a time, especially when it relates to Stoic philosophy.
And just to interject, I think a lot of people, when they hear that Stoic philosophy has a social component, or the justice matters, if they haven't got that sort of foundation laid and they jump right into that, then they're already a mess over here. Now they get to be a mess out in the public sphere, and then it doesn't work out well for anyone. Yeah,
but the mistake that I sometimes see is that's where the line is drawn, is saying what am I doing for me in order to help me out, and then they kind of latch overly much onto the concept of what's in our control versus what's not, and they mistakenly, from what I believe, apply that to other people or to other spheres. They think that that's the line, so you don't cross it, and they focus most of their effort on that. What it appears to me is that you cannot escape that community aspect of Stoicism. It's ingrained into it. So I'm a little bit touch and go, not quite fully comfortable when it comes to the Greek terms or the Latin terms. Many of them have connotations, or they mean several words or sentiments simultaneously. So that's something that I need to personally improve on. But there's certain words like oikiosis.
Oh yeah, oikiosis.
Is that?
That's right,
correct me if I'm wrong, but that's this idea that every individual or being is looking out for their self-interest in some respect.
Yeah.
That's
the start of it. Yeah.
Yes, and so how do we? So most people would think, okay, well that just means me. But when you involve the other aspects of like this Stoic web-like structure of the philosophy, which is how I describe it.
Yeah.
As it happens, what's in my self-interest as a social and rational animal designed by whatever powers that be, it means that by helping the greater community or those that are nearest to me at the same time that I'm self-improving, it's mutual. It's not mutually exclusive. By helping other people, you are helping yourself. And that's why different Stoics, like Cato the Younger, became so ingrained in Roman politics, or treated the soldiers that were under him to the extent that he did, by showing that he wasn't above them, he was with them, that it was only a title difference.
Marcus does that too.
Yes, he did. And Marcus Aurelius' Meditations, he's constantly telling himself not to just be another Caesar, that he was put in this position by whatever combination of elements or events to assist those that he happens to be in a position above, for lack of a better way of putting it. So you can't dissect those. That you eventually, in my personal experience and from what I've seen, you will develop an understanding that in order to assist yourself, there has to be a way that you help other people at the same time.
Yeah, it's they frame it sort of as rational animals, and as animals we have this natural, self-preservation drive, and then the question is, what do we sort of extend ourselves to or identify ourselves with? And it's, Heracles has this nice circles metaphor that gets talked about quite a bit. We start with our family. Now, of course, this presupposes that we actually like our family, which isn't the case for everybody. But you get the idea. There's a natural affection there, and when you think about your family members, you don't actually do like some sort of very egoistic calculation, like, well, if I'm nice to them, it's going to pay off to me, right?
Like it's a transactional type.
Yeah,
thing.
yeah. Instead, you're like, well, look, my brother is in pain. I'm going to go, deal with it because it also makes me feel bad that he is, or I'm going to celebrate with them, or I'm going to do what conduces. And then we expand it outward, and we use that as Heracles has these circles that eventually extend to the whole world. I think they saw that it's a natural thing, provided we get the obstacles out of the way, like our own selfishness or our fears or our willingness to sort of cut people off. So it's not natural, and like we will automatically do it like a plant,
right? Yeah. So there's a couple of different things that I can say about that. For one, there in terms of our self-interest or self-preservation instinct, there's a clear distinction between what is beneficial to me as just a physical living entity, and that I need food, shelter, some kind of reasonable temperature, nothing too cold, nothing too hot, but like preferably somewhere in the middle.
Or if it's going to be like that, some clothes.
Yes, close. If you can balance it out a little bit that way, those definitely help. But the distinction comes when you look at people as in terms of what I described, which was that they're social and rational. So there's a tier that's above just us being animals and reacting to these impulses that I need to eat, I need to sleep, I need to do all the other very pleasant things that are part of me as just a living being, but that because of this extra tier, you need to consider how to help yourself as a being that has reason, that is part of a community. So the way that I've always phrased it to myself in order to help reaffirm that as many times as it needs to be reaffirmed is that we as human beings can tell that we have to depend or understand on this social rational aspects of ourselves because of how we've been able to survive and dominate most of the planet.
Yeah.
That is that we don't have poison, we don't have claws, we don't have wings. The strongest among us are probably never going to be able to compete reasonably with a bear in terms
or even
of
a gorilla.
Right, in terms of sheer strength.
Yeah.
And you kind of get my point when it comes to that. So what do we have? I mean, our greatest physical evolutionary defense is that we happen to smell really bad if left alone for a long time without bathing. But that's
the big brains,
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. So you also have the big brains, and that's where the social rational elements come in. Is that we are again designed to use that word loosely by whatever powers that be, to use that term loosely, to work together, to communicate, to coordinate. So if we ignore that aspect of ourselves and just say, screw you, got mine, that sort of mentality, we are actually acting in the face of that nature. So we become animal-like to an extent when we behave that way, but we become even more so because we give away or act in the face of this primary advantage that we've had, this thing that defines us as human beings. And Epictetus talks about that. He says, you will never be faster than a horse, or is it more handsome than a horse?
Yeah.
Or more handsome than a lion.
We're be both.
And he says you will never be able to fly like a bird, and so on. And so that's where I draw most of that idea from, is that I am more than just a body. I'm more than just something that has to eat or sleep. So what defines me? And I need to improve that part of myself. By improving that part of myself and acting always in light of that, then it gets me closer to what is most excellent for me, to use Epictetus' terms, which is what brings you closer as a person, as a Stoic, to the concept of eudaimonia, which is like personal excellence. There's all sorts of other meanings floating around that, not just excellence, but that's the general term.
It's as if Stoicism and other virtue ethics that have similar, what we can call teleological, that is sort of goal-oriented or end-oriented views on human nature, are saying that human nature isn't something that we can simply take for granted. It's something that has to be a project for us to develop within ourselves. And I was thinking, as you're talking about this, the Stoics are actually the beginners of the natural law tradition that we see running through the Middle Ages and then, playing some role in modern theory. And we've got this basic level of self-preservation. All the animals share that in common. Some of them don't do a very good job at it, but, all
right, we try.
Yeah. And then before we actually get to, the distinctively human, the other thing that Cicero talks about, who's echoing this Stoic philosopher Panaetius, he's basically sort of transcribing Panaetius's ethics and adding a few wrinkles of his own, is that there's also the level of sexual desire and care for offspring, and then he talks about the rational level. And it's interesting, as rational creatures, these other lower drives get possibly transformed, so that we are a species that does couple, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are attracted in different ways, but it's still sort of heteronormative at this time, where a male and a female get together. Now we may be doing serial monogamy, or some people are into all sorts of things, but there is a basic thing there. And how is that rationally transformed? This is something that Stoics don't talk that much about. I think in part because ancient culture, they just took a lot of this for granted. Right? But I think this is incredibly important for our own day. You mentioned the feeling of, if you're not in a relationship, what the hell are you doing? What's your life worth? And I think this is something a lot of people struggle with. Not just, should I be in a relationship, but what kind of relationship? And so do you think Stoicism has much to contribute on that?
Yes, absolutely. So I think that some of that might be cultural. I think that it's deeper than that, kind of in the way that you described, and that it's almost like to use the term, like an instinctual type drive to seek somebody else out, just somebody that matches well with us. It's part of that underlying drive, so to speak. So to give you a specific example of what I believe that you're referring to, early on in my practice, I'd say about like a year or so after I started trying to randomly apply this stuff where I could, trying to retain even simple statements and then trying to figure out where they apply and so on and so forth.
Well, we should talk about that a little bit. That's that practice of using Stoic dogmata.
Yeah.
Little sayings. Every one of the Stoics says you've got to stock up your head with these one-liners, essentially, because you're going to need them.
Yeah.
Right.
And I'll segue into that. So early on, I eventually said, until you feel as though you have a grasp of how you interact with other people and how well, I want you, and I'm saying this to myself, that's why I'm phrasing it that way, I want you to go on dates as long as you are constantly reminding yourself that you aren't going into the date with the ultimate objective in order to form a relationship or to sleep with them or to gain something through them. Yeah. If you feel as though you are behaving in that way, then I want you to restrict yourself because it's only permissible as long as you are spending time as one human being to another human being. And once I began thinking in terms like that, all the pressure that I was putting on myself faded. And ultimately, it was controlled and reined in and curtailed.
Did that make the experience better?
Yes, it absolutely did, because I was focused on what the person was saying, what their interests were, what their hobbies were, instead of wow, she's really pretty, or any of the other thoughts that segue from that.
Yeah.
And first of all, the meetings were actually way more comfortable. As it happens, most people are attuned to an extent of how comfortable the other person is, or if they're putting on airs or something like that. And so it seemed to me that other people were more comfortable with me as I was behaving this way. So that is to answer kind of the question that you had before, or the point or the suggestion. As for how it affects, I believe that your question was how it affects like your approach to other people generally.
Well, I mean, we could talk about that. I was actually thinking about that whole realm of relationships, sexual desire. I mean, I'm not so concerned here about the child rearing part, which is interesting, but for you that's going to happen later. I mean, I know for me, I've got kids, and I do see a lot of applications for Stoicism with that, and as I've been writing on that, I've noticed that the Stoics actually don't tell us that much about that or about relationships. But this is a big field that I think for modern Stoicism, somebody could write a Stoicism and dating book, and I think it would make sense to do so.
Right. I agree with that. Like Donald Robertson has mentioned in the past, which is kind of a phrasing or something that I've kept in mind, is that 99% of all Stoic material has been lost, including philosophers that have...
And they did, in fact, it's either Zeno or Chrysippus wrote an Art of Love.
Yeah, I think I remember that.
Yeah. So there were some books on marriage and things like that. So they did talk about it. We just don't have it.
So would you like me to discuss some of the phrasing or the terms of things that you say to yourself? Because I think we kind of...
That's a good idea,
moved away from that.
Yeah.
So to give you some background, I didn't go into this just knowing what to do or how to do it or how to approach it. So I'll tell you an interesting, very shorthand story. I thought that Epictetus was the guy that came up with Stoicism. As it turns out, it was not. So I was reading from this Intro to Philosophy book where it had a very, very short synopsis of the history of it. as far as I was concerned, it was Zeno. Zeno was involved somehow. Somebody named Zeno, but didn't really touch on who he was or how he was important. Not that he was the founder of like Stoicism or anything, because I guess that was kind of like a side point.
Well,
really.
Intro to philosophy textbooks are a whole different, thing that we could get up on our soapbox about.
Yeah, but I thought that Zeno just buddied up with Epictetus at some point, and
he was a sidekick, maybe.
Right, and that they both worked with it. I thought that Epicurus, who was in the following chapter, was some kind of pen name or ghostwriter for Epictetus. But I was,
great.
and that's something else. So the only material that I had for about a year was Epictetus's Enchiridion. If you're not familiar with what the Enchiridion is, it's a handbook version, a pamphlet almost, of phrasings or sayings that you would carry around with you in a pocket. I don't know if Toga's
it's literally in the handbook, Enchiridion. It means little thing that you have.
Yeah, and it was a compilation of the discourses. The discourses came in several books. I don't recall ultimately how many, but of the surviving ones, I think that there's 4, right?
Yeah, we have 4, and we think there might have been 8.
Yeah. So I was drawing most of my my experience, my means of application from this handbook. And helpfully, the handbook was seemingly designed around the idea that they were reminders. They were short, curt, to the point, kind of self-contained ideas that you would be able to apply on the go, hence the handbook nature of it. But I struggled with it because it was difficult for me to understand, kind of going into it from the outside, how and where they applied. I was guessing. So what I did was I looked at a statement and I tried to think of where that would apply, what kind of common daily situations I would come across in which I could use this. And then my goal was to remember that it exists and what the words were, and then try to apply it to that specific situation. What was most helpful to me in the beginning was the idea that your favorite thing breaks just because of its nature. As a physical,
Chapter 3.
Right, as a physical object, fragile things break. If you kind of lose sight of that fact and you say, my favorite thing broke and this is bad, then you're necessarily going to feel everything that accompanies the thought, this thing that I liked is broken and this is bad because I won't be able to use it anymore. So...
And now the world sucks.
Yeah, exactly. So this applies not just to the fragile thing that he was talking about, I think it was a vase, but it applied to my coffee cup. My favorite coffee cup, which had like my like a little quote on it that I personally enjoyed as it related to a video game, that broke twice. And each time I thought to myself, there's something that I'm remembering the Enchiridion that applies to this. So I would go back and try to find it, and due to the handbook nature, it's relatively simple to do so. I would read it, and I would say, how many other cups do I have to drink out of? It wasn't just this one.
Yeah.
Is there anything in this situation that prevents me from going out and getting another one if I really felt as though I was going to miss it to that extent? Then eventually, as I started thinking in terms like that, as it relates to things that are lost, it extended outward. There was a situation in which I had an opportunity to buy a laptop. I wasn't really financially comfortable, but the alternative was that I had no computer to work with. And there was an increasing emphasis on relying on computers, on online discussion boards, so on and so forth. So what I was doing was that during my time as a resident assistant, I would put down on pen and paper entire essays that I was supposed to eventually upload. So in a sense, I was doing twice the work. It made sense to me, given this temporary financial increase that I had at one point from working a job, to buy a laptop. And this was really going to be the only opportunity to do so. So I went out and bought a laptop. I got a mid-range one. I wanted something that I wasn't going to have to really worry about for a long time, or about it slowing down kind of on its own, as some of the cheaper laptops do. And I had it for about a week. So I went to lunch, and in the cafeteria, there are these cubby holes. Everybody puts their backpacks in them, and they go out into the cafeteria, because the idea is that if you bring your backpack into the cafeteria, you might try to sneak like food or other items into it, like 100 ketchup packets or something like that. And they want to keep all their ketchup packets inside, understandably.
They have their priorities.
Yeah, correct. So my laptop I was taking to a class, and I went into the cafeteria. When I came out, my backpack was missing completely, and I had no idea where it was. So I said to myself, almost right away. So in the beginning, when you're still practicing, you're going to feel all these sentiments. Just because you read a paragraph and are trying to apply it, it doesn't mean that you're going to feel all the effects or that you're going to believe it. Once you start,
it takes a lot of practice.
Yes, once you start realizing that it actually has an effect, however gradual, on your behavior, you start to understand how it factors in and when it factors in and to what extent. But at this moment, I said, you're feeling as though this is a terrible thing. This was a very expensive item that you just purchased, and what does not being here mean? Of course, I did all the conventional things. I asked around. I talked to the cafeteria ladies and guys, and seeing if they had seen where it went. Nobody saw anything. Okay, my second step was there some kind of security footage, and that is being recorded of these cubby holes? Would you imagine that there would be? As it turns out, there wasn't.
Yeah.
And asking people nearby, but I understood that as time went on, the lower the chance that I would actually find this thing. So as I was heading to campus police, I was saying to myself, this is exactly the type of situation that you're not going to have a second opportunity to react properly to. What does it mean to not have this fancy new laptop that you've had? It just means that you're going to have to go back to writing on pen and paper. There was a time when you didn't have a laptop, and although it was inconvenient, you are fine. This is just a shift. This is you just not having it anymore. And then I have to remind myself of what the person that thought to take it was feeling. As far as they were concerned, they were doing something that was appropriate to them. It doesn't necessarily make it okay.
Yeah.
It doesn't, but they were driven by this feeling that perhaps they didn't have a laptop, and so they thought that it was in their best interest to take it from another person, regardless of whether or not that was harming, again, their nature as social and rational animals. It's impossible for them to have behaved in a different way. The only way that I can show other people that it isn't appropriate to take it is by modeling my behavior after that. It's possible that, it's unlikely, but possible that during my interactions with other people in which this topic happens to be discussed, that person might be listening or thinking about the situation. So I went to campus police. As it turns out, all the preparations I did just in case this sort of thing happened, the serial numbers, the date that it was purchased, the receipt, it didn't pan out. I got one question from them saying, do you remember if you had Wi-Fi on or something like that? Wow. And they never found it. That said, the following day, I was passing by in the cafeteria and I saw my backpack in the garbage. So whoever it was that took the laptop threw away the backpack. Why they didn't just put it in a cubby hole, I couldn't tell you. Maybe they were trying to hide the evidence. I don't know. But everything that was in there, the only thing that was missing was the laptop itself. Yeah. So they didn't take any of the books. And that was an opportunity
they don't value books, probably.
Right. And that was an opportunity, as potentially odd as it sounds, to be appreciative of the fact that I had a backpack, first of all, because I was mentally preparing myself to carry all my stuff in plastic bags.
Yeah.
And that all my books were there, including some of the philosophy books that I then had started immediately using right afterward. So that's just a description of how I've applied these different statements. So the statements are something that you try to use on hand. It's very difficult to segue from reading something to trying to purposely retain it, to understanding the context in which those statements apply, and then to be able to apply it reliably.
Yeah. What
helps is to, as the situation is happening, is to call to mind those statements as forcefully as you can, and to remember the entirety to the extent as you can, and then following it in kind of the way that I suggested.
Yeah, each of the Stoic authors that we have stresses how important that is. We're just looking. So today is beginning Stoic Week, and the morning reading is one that we've passed through many times. And Marcus Aurelius talking about the inner citadel. Create one for a refuge for yourself, and it says at the very end of the thing, this is the way you're going to do it. Stock up these statements for yourself, because it's not an inner citadel. You just retreat into yourself and like in the Seinfeld episode, say serenity now, to yourself, right?
Yeah.
Instead, you have to have. It's almost in a way. We say the best defense is a good offense. Having those things ready at hand. It's not like you're fighting the world or anything like that. Rather, you're ready to respond to the situations because this is another word that the Stoics use a lot. You've prepared yourself. In Greek, parskeuein, literally means to have all your stuff laid out around you, almost like a chef. Almost like a chef. Yeah, when a mechanic lays out their tools, or a chef is doing their mise en place. That's exactly what that sort of thing is.
So there's a couple of quotes that come to mind. Again, I'm paraphrasing, but Marcus Aurelius specifically references something like that, and that you don't want to be like a gladiator per se, where you need to pick up a sword in order to be able to fight properly, but you want to be a boxer instead, where all you have to do is just use what you've already got in order to face the world. Seneca mentions variously somewhere in the letters that what you are doing by trying to consider things in terms of what could happen and what your responses to them would be and what's happening in front of you and reacting to it properly as a soldier that's just preparing themselves. So he makes reference to the Roman soldier practice of putting up ramparts, making sure that all of your arms and armor are organized properly, that you are doing drills, even if nothing is necessarily happening, so that when the enemy charge does come, that you're in a position where you're already prepared to say, I've done all my stuff, now I just need to use what's in front of me. Epictetus also mentions times where you are faced with something and are in a position where you must respond to it in some sense, as this being the trial or the competition or the Olympics, or how you want to use it. There's a tendency to say to yourself, I just want to keep practicing. I'm not ready yet. I want to keep preparing, and it's not going to be allowed. It has to be now. And he makes reference to that by saying that somebody that is preparing to wrestle doesn't say to themselves at the moment of the competition, I wish that I could go back to my room and start doing lifting weights still in preparation for this. They just do it. So we have to have the same mentality as practicing Stoics.
And you also, when you're wrestling, you can't say to your opponent, I need you to. What I've practiced is this. Could you put your arm in that position?
Yeah. Could you just do that for me, real quick, and let me just kind of do what I've said that I could do? But there's seemingly endless opportunities to get that level of practice.
And then the more that we do it, the better. Like anything else, the better we get at it. But we're never, totally prepared for everything that comes across our plate, because the world is very complex. And is always throwing us new stuff.
So there was something that may be interesting to those watching, that a kind of phrasing that I've suggested to myself very early on in my practice, is that personally I refuse to call myself a Stoic, with a capital S Stoic. I always called myself a practicing Stoic. And the reason why I specifically framed things that way to myself was because I wanted to say that until I feel like I have a hold on particularly difficult events, I want to be in this frame of mind where I don't just assume that I know how to react to these different things. Because if I assume that I know, it's going to potentially affect my behavior and the way that I talk to other people that are still learning. If I assume that I know and act as though I know and state to other persons or recommend courses of actions to other persons that you should do this in this kind of situation, and they could try to use it, and potentially they might do it incorrectly because I suggested it incorrectly, and then they're going to be the ones that are, in a sense, harmed by my suggestions. So there was a Stoicism class, like a fully fledged, fully dedicated Stoicism class in my college experience.
Oh wow!
And the reason why this Stoicism class existed, according to the instructor, was because of her being interested in the different attempts to help the university that I was putting out there. And she said that she wanted to see how many people would join, who would be interested in it, what sort of progress would be made through it. So in this class, I suggested. So I lost my train of thought because the reason why I lost my train of thought is because I had there's this little voice in the back of my head that's saying, don't say something unless you mean it, unless you're actually, and that's been a very helpful kind of backup.
Were you just tempted to say something you didn't mean?
No, actually no. But it was kind of like it's Epictetus' recommendation of your own enemy lying in wait. Because when I was starting to discuss the Stoicism class, I thought to myself, is this an opportunity to gloat? Is that what you're trying to do? And I know that I'm not.
Yeah.
Right. But in reference to this Stoicism class, I could not tell you. I lost my train of thought. It's gone.
Well, so how many people? I was curious. How many people took the class?
About 20.
That's really good for a college class.
Yes.
Yeah.
So the way that it was phrased or handled was that we were expected to take sections of paragraphs and parts of books and try to apply it. So we were going to do kind of what I suggested before, which was take paragraphs and try to apply them, and then kind of communicate in small teams what we kind of accomplished.
Okay.
So there were different concerns, understandably, that were brought up, or different ways of approaching the class that differed. So for me personally, I partnered up with my roommate. My roommate attended the class because I was attending. There were others that were consider themselves to be persons that enjoyed philosophy generally, but knew that I was a Stoic and wanted to be a part of the class, and wanted to kind of like see what kind of holes they could create in Stoic philosophy.
Philosophy people are good for that.
Yeah. So they kind of the idea, they enjoyed classes the most where the general premise was, how do we know that there aren't little orange monsters chasing us around? We just don't happen to see them. That sort of thing. So a lot of their arguments in their essays was that Stoicism was only for rich people who are in a position to say to themselves, I don't need any kind of external things because they already have it.
Like Seneca.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Arguably.
Yeah.
Which the counter argument was and is still, well, Epictetus was one of the strongest advocates, and he literally came from nothing. And,
look at Cleanthes.
Yes.
Second scholarch of the Stoic school. The guy who, he got the job that there were other people who could have been the second scholarch, but he was the one who was practicing it the best. So Zeno passed it on to him, and he was a water carrier.
Yeah,
that was about as low as you can get.
He was also, at one point, he was so well respected or well regarded that he was offered some kind of like big financial gift to him, but I think that Zeno, right? Or was it whoever it was that was tutoring him said, you absolutely aren't going to take that.
Yeah.
So he kept doing what he was doing.
It was said that he was so thrifty that he could have supported, and Epictetus brings this up, that he could have supported 2 Cleanthes on his meager income from carrying water all around. Well, we should wrap this up because I don't want to run out of battery. So the site is it applyingstoicism.com?
Yes.
Okay, so
that's the main website that has the compilations of all of my writings That's where all of my essays go. It has PDF links to everything that I've written.
Resources?
Yes,
right?
a big resource list that I'm trying to expand all the time.
Yeah.
So I ask the authors of these different resources for their permission to add them to the site, and once I receive that, then they get posted on there and they're ordered alphabetically.
You should put this video on the site too.
I will.
And then there's the Facebook group, really great to check out. There's a Google Plus group for those who are anti-Facebook. You're not on Twitter, are you?
I am.
Oh, okay.
The
Twitter
handle
as well?
I couldn't fit. I think it's 15 characters.
Ah.
So it was one character short. So again, I had to just come to terms with it and say I wasn't going to be able to get applying _ stoicism or applying stoicism in there. So it's apply _ stoicism. So
That's close enough.
Yeah,
Okay.
right. So the main focus or intent behind the Twitter side of things is experimental, so to speak, where I would post quotes that are small enough.
Oh yeah, tough on Twitter.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, it's extremely tough, and so there's less of that now because there's only so many self-contained quotes.
Yeah.
Because it's all contextual for the most part. But now what it is it's a news feed to an extent. Occasionally, I will post updates on there, new things that have popped up on the website. I will still post smallish quotes on there when I can make it happen, or personal thoughts that I've had that can happen to be encapsulated in 140 characters. So it's not really a resource. It's more in itself. It's more a resource that points towards other resources.
Well, for people who like Twitter, they're used to that sort of thing.
Yeah.
You know? He's also on Patreon, which is a crowdfunding site. I'm a backer of Travis because I believe in the project. So I encourage you to, if you think it's worthwhile, make a monthly pledge because that way you're helping him to be self-sufficient. Everybody's got to earn an income in order to do this stuff. Yeah.
One of my goals that I'm keeping my expectations are very carefully managed is eventually I'd like to write full time on Stoic philosophy because of that missing 99%. I've taken it upon myself internally to try to develop my understanding of what's already out there to the extent that I would be able to help recover some of that 99%, which is a very controversial statement, and I'm aware of that, but that's how I feel. That's what I'm going to try to do.
Yeah. Any last words you want to say? Or?
Just thank you for watching. I hope that you are benefited from it, and if you check out my resources, that you're benefited by those too.
Thanks for coming on, and Travis is a good personal friend of mine too, so happy to do this interview with him.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
We're here at Stoicon, although Stoicon is over. That's what allowed us the opportunity to actually be in the same place at the same time for once. I think we only see each other. We Skype, but I think we only see each other face to face at Stoicon.
Well, yeah, we kind of done like a V type shape where like we're meeting kind of in Canada at this location.
That's
from where
right.
we are,
Yeah, two Americans meeting in Canada.
Yeah. So.
All right, so we'll end on that. Again, check out the links below, and I think that's pretty much it.
Yep. Bye, everybody.